We saw millions of dollars being exchanged in cash for chips at the casino. Very clear money laundering operation going on there. We identified buildings with bars on the windows and very heavy security, where local people told us trafficked individuals were being held against their will. And just a couple of kilometers upriver is Myanmar. Myanmar's Shan State is basically the methamphetamine factory for the Asia and Pacific. What does it mean to be surrounded by such a transnational criminal zone? So we're in the Golden Triangle. Behind me is the Mekong River. And then behind that, you can see all of that construction and large buildings. That's the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone in Laos. This Special Economic Zone is a joint venture between the government of Laos and a company or a transnational criminal network controlled by a former Chinese triad boss. And it's based on gambling, on human trafficking. There's allegations of drug smuggling going through that area as well. And you can see that it's a huge construction. The research that we're trying to do is to pin down a little bit more what the dynamics are right now and how this could play out over the next few years, particularly if the China-US relationship becomes more tense, becomes more fraught. Zones like this could be zones of much increased geopolitical competition, and that'll have very serious implications potentially right here, but more broadly for the region and beyond as well. So we visited King's Roman just a couple of days ago, and the levels of criminality were very clear. The lack of regulation was very clear. We saw millions of dollars being exchanged in cash for chips at the casino, without any kind of documentation. Very clear money laundering operation going on there. The size of the in-person gambling is not large enough to justify a zone of this kind. Clearly, the money that is passing through these casinos is not the punters that are coming to play, tens or hundreds or even thousands of dollars at the tables. It's massive money laundering, it's online gambling, it's proxy gambling. That's what's fueling the development of several $1 billion of infrastructure investment, private infrastructure investment that you see behind me by these sanctioned criminal networks. And we found many other things as well. We found clear evidence of scam operations, industrial scale scam operations, where thousands of people, some trafficked, some working freely, are engaged in romance scams, in trapping people online, scamming people into investments where they lose their money. And those operations are being run from buildings in the zone behind me. We saw those, we identified buildings with bars on the windows and very heavy security, where local people told us trafficked individuals were being held against their will and forced to carry out these scams and could not escape, could not leave. Allegations of killings as well, if they weren't able to meet their quotas in these areas. We also found a location where bears and tigers are being farmed just outside of the urban center behind me, and we found tiger products, particularly tiger wine, on sale openly in the zone. So this is also a zone of wildlife trafficking, of illegal farming of rare species. So this is not really hidden. It's happening in the center of this zone. It's very easy to find out information about it. And the zone is expanding rapidly. There's an enormous amount of construction activity going on, new buildings being built, a huge riverfront development of apartments and hotel and casino just behind me on reclaimed land in the river. And there's a new international airport for this zone. It's just a few kilometers behind the zone. It'll accept direct international flights. So this is a criminal economic zone with its own international airport. This special economic zone has a very Chinese character. Only yuan is accepted. Chinese is the only language really spoken in shops and businesses. But this is not a Chinese state project. However much the developers might want to claim that it's part of the Belt and Road Initiative and that they're upstanding overseas Chinese citizens, this is not a Chinese government initiative. But it's very clear that if the Chinese government wanted to shut this down, if it felt that this was a threat to its interests, it could very easily do so. It could easily seal the border. It could easily put pressure on Thailand and Laos to cut off connectivity to this zone. So it's happening with the knowledge of China and without China really having apparently done very much to stop it from happening. Following the coup in Myanmar and the violence and also economic desperation of people in Myanmar, there's been a lot of people over the last few months fleeing from Myanmar to this zone in the hope of finding work. All of the staff, the security guards, the cleaners are all from Myanmar. Myanmar's Shan State, just on the left bank of the Mekong River up here, is the largest source of methamphetamines in the world. It's an area of the country, much of which is beyond the control of central authorities, and in enclaves controlled by armed groups, some aligned with the Myanmar military, some not. There's a lot of criminal activity, a lot of drug production. This is basically the methamphetamine factory for the Asia and Pacific. After the coup, Shan State has slipped further out of Naypyidar's control. And so we've seen an increase in drug production, quite significant increase in opium production, but also methamphetamine and yaba tablets, speed tablets, are flooding this part of Thailand.
For the first time in the region, we seized over 1 billion meth tablets. This is a really huge amount. In terms of tablets, it might be hard to see, but if we convert it to tons, this is equivalent to about 91 tons. So what we can see is that organized crime groups have really been able to push supply into the region to drop these prices, also possibly lower costs of manufacture. But it's very concerning because this means greater accessibility to drugs, greater affordability to drugs, especially among younger people who might not have had the purchasing power before now.
พวกที่ค้ายาเสพติดผิดกฎหมายเขาจะมาหลายๆรูปแบบนะครับแฝงมาในการเป็นชาวบ้านหาปลาบ้างนะครับโดยใช้เรือหางยาวพอสบโอกาสถ้าปลอดคนหรือว่ามีคนลาดตระเวนเขาจะก็นัดส่งยาโดยทุกวันนี้มันการโซเชียลมันเจริญโทรศัพท์แจ้งกันแล้วเขาก็ส่งแล้วก็พวกได้รับใช้เวลาไม่นานแล้วก็ขึ้นรถกลับมาเลย
เพราะหาเงินไม่ได้เราจะเอาเงินที่ไหนไปเล่นล่ะก็อย่างที่บอกก็ต้องหาลักหาขโมยหาแกะของในบ้านไปขายหาของอะไรไปขายที่ขายได้ถ้าคนเราต้องการมากๆนะมันก็จะเป็นงั้น
These drugs are being trafficked far afield, as far as Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. So this part of the world is shaping up to be somewhere where transnational criminal networks can really operate with relative freedom because of enclaves like this behind me, and also the parts of Shan State that operate as semi-independent enclaves. And that's very worrying. It's very worrying for law enforcement, but it's very worrying for policymakers. What does it mean for northern Thailand to be surrounded by such a transnational criminal zone? But there are also geopolitical ramifications of this. The Mekong is a zone of geopolitical competition, particularly between China and the US. China has potentially a lot of influence over zones like this. China potentially has a lot of influence over Myanmar as well. And so China's influence down the Mekong River is increasing, even as zones like this proliferate. And so there's a lot of geopolitical concern here as well. The US and other Western allies of Thailand are seeing this kind of encroachment as a kind of sovereign takeover of parts of Laos, parts of Myanmar. It's worrying for ASEAN and its relationships with China and the US as well. So this is an area of the world where great power competition is being felt in very real terms, and it's providing avenues for criminal networks to take advantage of this great power rivalry, find the spaces that leaves, the sovereignty vacuum that leaves, and they're exploiting that. I think it's really important that criminal zones like this, drug trafficking and drug production, is not just seen as a criminal justice issue. It's not just a problem for police. It's not just about seizing drugs and trying to limit the money laundering, massive money laundering that's going through zones like this. This is a political problem. This is a problem for the region, and it should be addressed by political leaders and not just left to law enforcement. Because, although they can tackle some of the symptoms, what law enforcement say is that they're not equipped to deal with the underlying causes of the criminality that they're seeing. That's a political and a geopolitical question, and it has to be addressed as such.